Hello, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you are. Welcome to another special edition of our Conversations with Authors program. This one is called Race in America, and it's an annual event. I started this it was either 2018 or 2019 in conjunction with Book Passage. Initially, it was in-person panel event. But this year, like last year, we have pivoted to it being set up as kind of a live online mini series. This is done in conjunction with Black History Month and recognizes the importance of uplifting diverse voices and stories. We cover a range of vital issues, including race, racism, immigration, exploring possible solutions. We do this featuring BIPOC authors and agents of change. With that, I'd like to introduce our brilliantly talented authors and their books. Unforgetting by Roberto Lavato is an urgent, no-holds-barred tale of gang life, guerrilla warfare, and trauma and interconnected violence between the United States and El Salvador. This memoir excavates family history and reveals the intimate stories beneath the headlines. It talks about gang violence and mass Central American migration, one of the most important yet least understood humanitarian crises of our time. And with that, I want you to know that Roberto Lavato is San Francisco native, although he's joining us from Las Vegas. His parents immigrated from El Salvador. He was raised in the Mission District, right, Roberto? And that is home to the highest concentration of murals of any neighborhood in the world. I did not even know that till I read your introduction. That's amazing. And it's the reason his aesthetic is California, urban, not tropical. Lavato is an educator, journalist, and writer based at the San Francisco Writers Grotto, although, as I mentioned, right now he's in Las Vegas. He can explain why later. Also featured tonight is Dr. Raina León, and her book is In Black, Godmother, This Body. It offers what a godmother should offer, a portal to infinite divine possibility, a safe space to learn something new, a multifaceted generosity. These are poems that mother, mentor, and mend and break open again. They're amazing. I did listen to them and I love them. Dr. León is an Afro-Latina poet and writer. She is a professor of English education at St. Mary's College of California and founding editor of the Acentos Review, an online journal of Latinx arts. She is currently working on a hybrid manuscript that explores Black feminism, mothering, and resisting in and to the academy. She's joining us from Philadelphia. Audience, I want to encourage you to put your questions and comments in the chat. I promise we'll get to it eventually, but before the event is over. With that, I want to turn it over to our wonderful guest.
Thank you, Paula, and thank you, Reina, and thank you to Book Passage, our old friends in the Bay Area who I'm missing. Just to clarify, I'm visiting assistant professor here at University of Nevada, Las Vegas. I'm trying to look and be scholarly. It's, kind of working, kind of not. I don't know. No sé si me queda el zapato. And I'm honored to be with you, Reina, in particular, and know that you're doing the work out there in the Cold East.
I'm so happy to be with you. And again, echoing the thanks to Book Passage and Paula and you, Roberto. It's been a long time since the last time we were in the same physical space or even on the virtual, but to be able to be in conversation with you is as dreamy. Like our first in-depth interaction was at the Writers Grotto through the Rooted and Written program, which you had the vision to create in collaboration with a collective of other writers, and such a changing influence on so many of us writers of color in the Bay. and having such powerful effect on many people, whether they remain in relationship to the grotto or beyond. So I celebrate all of that you've done in that way, but also in so many others.
Igualmente. Thank you.
So we have to talk about, so many things, so many things.
Mhm.
So I'm curious where did the fire come from for this book, for your book? And I suppose I can, do the same, but I'm curious, like, where did it
Yeah.
come from?
Well, fire came from the volcanoes of El Salvador, the volcanic,
Uh,
and the volcanoes, remember, I don't want to just be like, use it as this phallic macho thing, right? It's actually, if you look at volcanoes and the way that the minerals from the volcanoes give nurture and nutrients to the entire green that makes the tropics around, the fire. I think it's called the circle of fire around
yeah, the Ring of Fire, yeah.
the ring of fire where all the volcanoes are in the world. They're some of the most beautiful places on earth.
Yeah.
So you gotta, if you're from the South, you know that beauty and fire are inseparable. And if you like certain kinds of love, you better have some fire, or what are you doing?
For sure.
So it really comes from, I think, Salvadoran history and its shadow U.S. history, like the way that, those that don't know, my book's about at one level, it's a story of a journalist's search to understand why his parents' homeland, El Salvador, becomes quote unquote the most violent country on earth, which is in terms of homicides, but in terms of exporting guns and militarism and trillion-dollar budgets, I'll let the audience guess which is actually the most violent country on earth. So that's at one level, but at a deeper level, it's to understand myself, and through this umbilical connection I have to this volcanic country that has intense violence, but also intense beauty and power, right? As expressed, for example, in the poetry and the poetry that's never separate from the politics, right? Which is a Latin American way of being, which is why I started writing a book about poet warriorship. So the fire comes from the land, the people, overcoming U.S. imperialism and fascism, literally fascism, like militarism. So that's kind of where it comes from. How about in your case? Where does the fire come from for you to have the audacity to talk about God and mother? ¿Quién eres tú para hablar de esto? Dime.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to talk about that on your first date. No, it came from love, right? And also the reality and of threat against Black and brown peoples in the U.S., and that specifically within Black maternal health outcomes, right? And having the difficulty of conceiving children and going through all sorts of medical interventions to have my babies. And at the same time, the context of the U.S. is such that I recognize that my peoples are constantly under threat. And so I'm engaging in a practice of creating life, facilitating life to be in the world under the constant threat, right? Like I'm watching the news, I'm seeing the digital lynching, the lynching and the lynching again through social media and images after image. And at the same time saying I'm still committed to life, to creation, to be in alignment with the spark of creation. It's a wild, commitment, and going attention, right, with also the lessons that I have learned around mothering, especially around Blackness and mothering and identity, and pushing against in my own existence the box of being a particular girl, a Boricua girl, a Black and Boricua girl, an Afro Boricua girl, like all these constrictions within my own family, and countering the internalized racism and pushing back against that and attacking that, so that I can be a better mother. So I can be.
You don't look like Bad Bunny. What kind of Boricua are you?
Yeah, we roll in the same circles, and at least in my mind. At least in my mind, we do.
Okay.
But yeah, it comes from that, right? It comes from, but ultimately it's about love. And I love that you also gave the metaphor of the volcan, because across the world there are always so many um cosmologies that and stories, legends, myths that explore the volcan, the volcano, as this metaphor for love and tragedy and longing, and and so there's so much as well within the beauty and the tumult within your work. So to start us out with that metaphor is quite poignant for me. So
Well,
yeah.
actually, why don't we speaking of I think Paula suggested, if you agree, I think they want us to read something from our.
Yeah, for sure. You want to
So,
go first?
I don't know. I mean, I had a piece that goes into like that connection, the way to show that the way that for some of our peoples, like the fire and the love, the tragedy and the love are never really separated. And so I had a scene about that. If
Yeah, please.
so, just the context is me, kind of just decided to join the guerrillas, and I left a woman in San Francisco, there in San Francisco. Her name is G. I left her hanging or en jabón on soap, as we say in Salvadoran, meaning that I said, hey, I really like you. We're more than friends, and here's chocolate and poetry. But hey, I'm taking off. I'm going to go to war. And the subtext there is, I'm going to go get laid in the middle of war, which people that went to war would know. So, I was, but my motive was not that. My main motive was to go join, a very serious, obviously go to war.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm working with comandos urbanos, urban commandos, and doing logistics and other work. And I left G back in San Francisco, not knowing when I'm going to come back. And I'm just pondering in this clandestine house, like, man, what the hell have I got myself into? Because you remember, I'm like I was in the introduction, I'm not some tropical dude. I grew up on the streets of San Francisco, the pre-Silicon Valley streets of San Francisco. So I'm there pondering, damn, what am I doing? This is crazy. And then so here we go. I got my own shock months later as I was laying in my apartment in San Salvador, sipping some cola champagne, one of the piss gold soft drinks every Latin American country has. I was reflecting on how much things had changed for me since leaving San Francisco the year before, when the phone rang, an unusual occurrence given that I lived in a place few except the compas, the guerrillas, knew about. Bueno, may I help you? Hola, Beto. The silky sweet voice sounded familiar, but before my heart leaped, I paused. G? I asked. Yes. Where are you? San Salvador. What? Yes, I'm here. You're here? I said, my voice being higher octaves of disbelief. Yes. I remained silent for a moment, stunned at the fact that this woman who publicly represented the FMLN guerrillas had somehow managed to get into the country. The Salvadoran government had had her and other publicly identified members of the FMLN on their list of people to detain on site at any airport or border crossing. G could be killed if they caught her here. What are you doing here? I asked. I'm here on some important business and need to speak with you, she said in her trademark, no-nonsense tone. Sure, when and where do you want to meet? Let's meet where the light shines, she said, which was code for the Antorchas, an open-air restaurant frequented by the compas. The restaurant had torches placed all around its edges. I wanted to know more about this special mission almost as much as I simply wanted to see her. I showered, put on some nice clothes, and armed myself with my secret weapon, Jovan Musk Oil, my preferred cologne. I showed up a little late to find a smiling G already there. A white-haired guitarist was playing Ella, a lovely bolero from Mom and Pop's era, in front of a couple at a nearby table. G was looking ever the summer beauty in a black flowered dress that hung on her tight body wonderfully. The Salvadoran sun made her round face look especially radiant. Being G, she rocketed us through the niceties, then started in with the reason she'd come. The smell of flat iron beef grilling beneath the thatched palm roof and the fancy blue tropical drinks with little wooden umbrellas in them gave the restaurant on busy Boulevard de los Héroes a suave, intimate beach vibe made stronger by all the antorchas. So T, she started, I'm here with some important news. How did you get into the country? The compañeros got me some glasses, a wig, and a fake passport, and I came in through the Guatemala border, she said en voz bajita. Wow, that's pretty gutsy. Noting her need to talk about the mission, I asked, so what brings you here? Well, to be honest, you left me in limbo, T. Huh? In limbo? What do you mean? What the fuck is she bringing this up for? Before you left, she said, when we were getting to know each other in San Francisco, you said we were more than friends. You gave me chocolates. You gave me poesía and gave me other signs that led me to believe that what you said was true. Well, that's kind of true, I guess. But yet, on the other hand, you left things ambiguous, she interjected, like you weren't sure what we were after such beautiful moments we spent together. Okay, yes, I said, still waiting for the larger mission to reveal itself. You know me, Beto. You know that I like to be clear, said G, sounding like the focused diplomat and explosives expert she was. Yes, you do. You know I can't stand ambiguity. No, you can't. So I would just tell you, Tito. Tito, I'm in love with you and need to know how you feel about me. I've been living with this ambiguity since last year and want you to be clear with me. I can't keep living like this. Uh-oh. That's what she fucking came here for? Me? Fuck. Subversive in war turned out to also mean subversive in love. My immediate thought, G came to undermine my game of macking on lots of women in wartime El Salvador. But I also recognized our shared desire. I kept looking at her in disbelief, and the rush of memories came back to me. Walking near my old church, talking about opera, feeling like she actually liked me for me, despite feeling like a fucked up kid in the mission. Fuck. So I did the obvious thing any red-blooded revolucionario salvadoreño macho would do in such a potentially explosive situation. Excuse me for a second. I have to go to the bathroom. I'll be right back. Okay, G said in a tone that said, what the fuck? On my way to the bathroom, I walked up to the old guitarist dude playing music in the restaurant and whispered in his ear. Then I went back to the bathroom, combed my hair, washed my face before I came out blasting like I was Michael Corleone entering gangster life at the Bronx Italian restaurant. I strolled back to the table. So you want an answer, I asked, standing before her with the guitars behind me? Here's your answer. The guitarist started playing Sabor a Mi. I'd first learned the lyrics of the classic bolero turned lowrider oldie about the lover's taste when Pop used to play it for Mom. Now I put his Orphic powers to use myself. I started serenading G. The song ended. I smiled and said, there's your answer. She smiled back and got up to put her face close to mine. We paused to inhale each other's breath, and then our lips finally touched. We decided to go back to a cheap motel used by sex workers working near Tia Esperanza's house on 5 de Noviembre Street. Early the next morning before dawn, as we floated out of the motel high on new love, we were greeted by the sight of soldiers who were about a block and a half away and coming our way. We turned and walked quickly in the opposite direction, hoping that a taxi or some other vehicle might come in our direction, but there were no cars in sight. An eternity passed before we saw the lights of a vehicle approaching, surely our last opportunity to escape torture and likely death. Thank you. I won't tell you what happens if we get killed or not, but because I want you to read the book, but there it is.
You got to get the book. You got to get the book. I know.
Get the book to find out if we get blown away or not by the
I know. I'm so glad you read that scene. I love that scene. I love that part of the book.
Yeah, it goes to what we were just talking about, right? It just
Yeah.
like the way that you said beautifully how tragedy and love are never
Yeah.
very far from each other for many of us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll pick up that theme. I'll offer a poem, maybe two, since, you know, poems are short.
Mhm. Go for it.
Yeah, the only thing you need to know about the first one is that elicottero means helicopter in Italian. My husband's Italian, so the kids have a lot of languages in the house.
Wow.
Hover. The other thing you need to know is those who are watching, I do not take for granted that those who are watching may be far flung across the world, perhaps. And California has fire seasons, and so they're increasingly getting more and more devastating. And in 2020 in particular, we had the day with no sun that I distinctly remember, where it was so the soot was so thick that it actually blocked out the sun for a day and a little bit afterwards, where the on a sunny day, what should have been a sunny day, it was actually quite brown in the sky, just a layer of a hover. Above us, there are no helicopters. Not like when the wind smelled like California soot, and every hour sirens wove their hair into ours and sung names to enchant cacophony. Say their names, and we were home. Your sister newborn in my arms, protecting her life of protest. Weeks before, each time a plane scored the Berkeley sky in white, you would point up, say, Mama, because I am always in the sky, even when my skin burns in the sun next to yours. How my eyes leak with storms you cannot yet name. We stand in unhinged weather. There are no helicopters today. You bang on a wheelbarrow with dried bamboo stalks as drumsticks and lift your toddler throat up to shout, Gota! Over and over again. A screamo chorus, lyrics perfectly formed to your ears. I nod only, yes, and keep beat. At the People's Park, marchers assemble with banners of I can't breathe. San Pablo, I can hear the horns of a car parade. Inside, the mourners shout behind masks from open windows, while a virus flies all around us. Pandemic and crown and white. Surrounded by fences, I can keep you safe. Until I can't. Every door has a threat of splinter. But there are no helicopters today. Koto! You yell. Somewhere they descend. Somewhere a body hangs, halfway between metal and earth. And this poem, so my daughter was born, and then 2 days later, George Floyd was killed. The day I brought her home was the day of his murder. And she was also born in a COVID isolation room. Luckily, we did not have COVID, but the treatment at the time, especially so early in the pandemic, was not good. Nobody knew anything, and so I offer forgiveness for our mistreatment. But no one should have to beg for food while they're in labor or preparing to give birth. Nobody should have to beg for water. 21 caskets in an infinity line. At the head of the line, that casket belongs to my wife's mother. That's a matriarch there, my children's grandmother there, and so many more behind her. We are at a funeral. The poet speaks in the dream. All the pallbearers are Black men in crisp suits with white-gloved hands. They slide the caskets, black and polished to shine, one after another down a church aisle. 21. Someone in that line is one of mine. A man I fantasized could hold me when I was still a girl trying to be someone such a man could see. I know many more in this line. Those who mourn in person, wear their masks and spread their bodies across the church. There are screens that unfold their wailing faces. Mechanized masks that should short for all the water and salt in the air. When I wake, I say, this is how I process the grief. the remembrances of longed for intimacy, the passage of years, and now he's gone. And so is she and they, and oh, so many: virus, bullet, knee, rope. Eventually, we are all calcium white. The baby I carry, I thought would split me open early, eager to be in this world. But now I feel her fingers at the gate, how they press to stitch me closed. The womb is a safer dance than blossoms, and birth is just another path to die, drowning in your own undulation. Yeah, this tension, right, of the tenderness and the sorrow, the grief, the tragedy, and the love, the heat of rage and the heat of passion. There's multiplicities, there's complexities.
I want to ask you something there, Reina. You mentioned the word line a couple of times, and you're in Philadelphia,
Yeah.
where this dude you may have heard of, doctor, dude named W.B. Du Bois.
Yes. Yes, I
You
have.
heard of him, I'm sure, right? I'm kidding. So Du Bois spent a lot of time in Philly, and he talked about like the railroad being like the color line, a manifestation of the color line in some of his writings there. And you're coming from California, which, in terms of, from what I understand at least, is a very different place in terms of the Black experience.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And so I wanted to ask you, like, California is looking at a future where it even further diminishes. Silicon Valley and Southern California gentrification will further dilute what remains of the Black community in Los Angeles, which was the core of Black California.
Right.
So San Francisco's done. I grew
Right.
up Fillmore. I grew up when there was a thriving Fillmore community. And I watched it just being.
Yeah.
So tell us, what is the experience like? What is the difference in experience, and how is it going to show? How is it showing up in the writing?
Yeah, it's wild. When I first moved to California, I remember my dad came to visit me. Now, my grandfather, his father was a merchant marine, and so he traveled all over the world, as a cook, as a chef, on ships, and he loved San Francisco and would talk about San Francisco all the time because he used to ship out from there. And so my dad would hear stories, but he had never been his whole life. And so my grandfather transitioned when I was just like one. My father gets to come when I'm in my 30s, and we find ourselves counting the people of color, counting specifically the Black people that we could see as we're driving through the city. And I tell you, we were in the city for like, I don't know, 3 hours or something, and we counted maybe 5 people wherever, of all the places that we went. And it was just a clear indicator of the absolute like pushing out of Black people, but thinking about the expansiveness of gentrification within San Francisco. Philadelphia is a chocolate city. It is incredibly like diverse with all sorts of backgrounds, but also very Black. And yet it is also a very segregated town, right? It's very segregated by sections. And that, all of that has an impact not only on my writing and talking about like the Latinx experience, Boricua experience, and especially in Puerto Rico, not in Puerto Rico, in Philadelphia, and my experience as a person of diaspora, but also like my Blackness within the city, and thinking about how I raise my kids, and to be aware of all the complexities of how we interact with people, and the dangers going from one place to another. So I don't think I was aware. I think because I was not so much aware, because of the cushion of being so immersed within artistic community and the inclusiveness of it and the diversity of art spaces within my experience within the Bay Area. I did not have the wariness of threat within my artistic, my working life, my outside of the home life, in the same way that as I might have as like person walking in the world generally, but because so much of my life was so immersed within vibrant diversity within the Bay, it's different now because the rhythm of my life is so much more family oriented, and then and because of emerging from the pandemic, folks are just starting to come out into the world again, and it's feeling sometimes icky. So,
and how does that rhythm show up on the page, or is it showing up yet?
yeah, I think it's showing up more in my hearkening back to ancestors. So I've been more recently, what was mentioned in the bio, like working on some essays around Black feminism and mothering and the academy. So the academy can be a very hostile place for me, for people like me, for Black people, especially for Black
Really?
women. Oh, sometimes, maybe there's some bonfires, who knows? You just look at the news and think about how many the African American Studies course has been like totally
AP?
the AP water course, it's been watered down. What DeSantis is doing in California, but it's happening all over the country. That's part of a long history of watering down and a curriculum that pushes people to do their own examinations and their own critical thinkings, which ultimately leads to an uneducated populace, and a populace more willing to accept fascism. So, it's a strategic move over generations. So, but all of that comes into my writing for sure, and into my practice as an educator. And then me, especially thinking about my ancestors and looking at the past, looking at the lessons of the past, and thinking about not only generational trauma, but generational joy and generational resolve and generational gumption and generational resistance. Like, what can we also call back and say, this is also written on my being, this is written on my soul. In the same way, yes, the trauma is there. Let's call that what it is. But let me also say that I got something else too from my people. And so I'm, working with my mom on a podcast, and so that definitely comes through all the creative stuff. How about you?
What about me?
Well, I'm really interested, like, we had shared before, because now I'm on this ancestor tick. And I was just at this university, SUNY Morrisville, and there was a student there who asked the most incisive question. Simone was her name, is her name, and I'm going to paraphrase it. But does it pain you to claim as ancestors those who have engaged in atrocities? And how do you move through or with that, especially with your book, right? Like there's so much discovery in your relationship to history and with your father, your personal relationship with your father, but also recognizing the impact of generational trauma and his witnessing on your relationship. But there's also you really digging into those relationships, like throughout the book, within the braided narrative of it. It's brilliant and daring and like historical, like incredibly rich. But this question from Simone is poignant too. Like, does it pain you to claim those folks as ancestors?
You tell Simone she should not be asking these difficult questions that I can't fucking answer, man. So, all right, you give her my regards in that way, but let me try. No, that's a great question. Does it pain me to? I mean, I see our family stories, the family secrets, as a big Savoya, right? A big onion. Got layers upon layers upon layers. And my job as a writer is to peel back one layer after another until I feel like I've gone as far as I can go. I mean, this is actually how I learned. You know how you learn stuff in writing a book?
Yeah.
I learned, and now I encourage my students, and anybody in the audience interested in writing, when you have a story and you think you've got it, just simply ask, what's the deeper story? And I pose this and I get a lot of good stuff from students. So this method, it kind of works. And it worked. I learned it in the course of writing my book, where I thought, am I going to write a memoir about it? I don't have anything to say. I didn't think I had anything to say. And, I wanted to do like a story as a journalist. Then I realized I'm going to tell a story of El Salvador and U.S. violence. I can't just do it as a journalist because my dad has this colossal secret, as you know, that people have to read the book to find out. But my dad's dad has a colossal secret too that I will reveal. So my dad, just for context, was born like the majority of children in the 1920s in El Salvador was already a majority single mother-headed household country because of different things, especially this thing called capitalism and the way it developed the economy, the agricultural economy, and the migration patterns in the country and around it. So my dad grew up was born before and was 9 years old when this thing happens in 1932 called La Matanza, the Great Massacre, which scholars at Oxford that I've interviewed told me is hands down the single most violent episode in the history of the Americas. And one of the most violent in world history as far as the number of people killed per day, per hour, within a concentrated space in a 2-week period. Tens of thousands were killed. We don't know because the bones haven't been excavated. So only some of it has. And so, but, we have records and, there's a work to reconstitute, la memoria histórica, the historical memory of this and other tragedies. So turns out I talked this historian. There's a scene in the book where I'm at the Universidad del Salvador talking to the preeminent historian of my dad's hometown, and where part of this took place. La Matanza, Aguachapan, my dad's town, which is an indigenous word, right? And there's a lot of indigenous people. My dad's hometown was the site of a massive murder. So then, the historian, Moran, he says, bueno, mire, no sé cómo decirle esto, pero I don't know how to tell you this, but your grandfather was one of the perpetrators of La Matanza. So that pained me at one level, but at another level, I promised my dad I would be justo in telling his story. Because, I had to tell him, hey, Pop, look, you're going to come out looking fly and perfect beauty and brilliant as you are. But I'm also going to talk about that other shit that we don't talk about, violence and humiliation. And he was, he swallowed, tragó grueso, and he knows me. I'm going to do what I'm going to do. I'm his son. So then I said, I'm also going to talk about your family because va a ser justo con ellos. He says, yes, which justo for him, towards him meant I'm going to be balanced with him. Justo towards his father who left him illegitimate on his birth certificate and in his life. This coffee baron, his father was super rich, a millionaire, left him out of wedlock in a shack with my grandmother and his grandmother. And he said, va a ser justo con él. You're going to be just with him. Basically said, you're going to get his ass too, right? I said, yeah, I'm going to get him, Pop. Don't worry. So I felt sad to be linked to such mass murder, but at the same time, I felt good bringing narrative, story, justice to him and others whose terror and mass murder has been unstoried. And I wanted, like, young, especially if I had to pick an audience that I was writing for, was young Salvadorans that are coming after me, who born here or in El Salvador, who have this feeling that the poet Roque Dalton said, que todos nacimos medio muertos en 1932. We were all born half dead in 1932, right? This guy here, Roque Dalton, who was a poet warrior, right? He was a guerrilla and a writer. I wanted to be him. So a lot of us did. So Roque Dalton, we were all born half dead. And you got that feeling, like you look at a gang member and you're looking at a walking, talking, unresolved intergenerational trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to speak to that generation that feels that but doesn't know why. And
Yeah.
why has a lot to do with the normalization of violence, as in La Matanza.
Yeah.
So, let's talk about, can we talk about your Puerto Rico-ness, your Boricua-ness?
For sure.
How do
Well,
you negotiate between kind of on the page, how do you negotiate between your US raised Black
yeah,
identity
yeah.
and your Puerto Rican identity, and what was that do to you and the poet and the writer and the thinker?
Yeah, for sure. Like one of the earlier pieces in the book is this extended lyric essay, which explores a relationship that I have with one of my titis, one of my tias. Um, and the lessons that I learned from her, but also through ancestral research, right? And there are these instances of, oh, I have a baby shower and I'm talking to my husband about like, okay, your job when we go to this baby shower is to be my shield, like keep her away from me. And him being like, she's so nice to me, like I don't understand. And I'm like, oh baby, like you're white, like this is why she's nice to you, because you're the symbol of success. Do you understand? Like, oh, okay. Because there's this like unsaid blancamiento, like whitening of the race kind of intention, and or a countering of blackness throughout my family, or me being told, there are anecdotes within the book of like, oh, when I mentioned going to graduate school, being told that I should go to Miami and find a nice Cuban to marry because there's too much black in the family. And I was like, wait, I'm black, my mother is black, my father is Afro Boricua, right? Like we blackity black, right? And that erasure of blackness from our Boricua identity, right? And then when I do the research, I can track race on birth certificates, not for the 200 years, but I can also track as rooted as we are in a particular community in Trujillo Alto, primarily in Puerto Rico, for like 200 years. But yet when I'm here, I can be in conversation with folks and they're like, oh, well, you're not really, Puerto Rican enough. And I'm like, yo, I'm just 2 generations. Like my dad was born here. My grandparents came from Puerto Rico. Like, but it's 200 years. It's 200 plus years in the same communities, but I'm not enough. And I think about there is a hurt in that, but it's also an invitation for reconnection, and so that's comes through as well within my work. I see there's a question from Bob. My book and poems, are they only available in audio? No, you can buy the books, the physical books, on your favorite dealers, wherever you buy your books. I have 4 collections of poetry. Black Godmother's Body is the most recent, that just came out in August, but 4 collections, full collections, and then 2 chapbooks as well. So, and one of the chapbooks is actually a collection of essays. It's really small. You won't actually probably find it. It was only a limited edition, 50 copies ever made, from Alley Cat Press in San Francisco. So if you find one, hold on to that.
Collector's item.
Go get it.
Yeah, Alley Cat, like on 24th.
Yeah. In the
Oh my
Mission.
God. There's a great bookstore there now, Midnight Medicine for Nightmares now.
That's right. Now it's Medicine for Nightmares. I was an artist in residence at the Alley Cat, and that was part of the residency model, was to do
Oh,
like a
wow.
little chapbook. Yeah.
Yeah, let me ask you another question. Like this doctor thing in front of your name there on the screen, and the
Yeah.
academic thing. What's the focus of your intellectual work and your doctorate, and how does your geek academic stuff enter into the work?
Oh, I'm so heady, y'all. My areas of expertise, I had a few different strands, but really in critical pedagogy, So I draw on the work, especially of Freire, as an influence in thinking about the humanization of
Paulo
education.
Freire.
Yeah, Paulo Freire. And thinking about how to cultivate communities of practice and care and praxis. But doing that through creative practice, oftentimes. So I explore English education, the use of poetry, and then of course using of multicultural or text from contemporary multicultural writers, because one should not be like me and not have any exposure to writers of color until you get to college. Like that shouldn't happen in an
Yeah.
educational space. And so that was part of my commitment, is part of my commitment as an educator.
So how does it come into the work?
It comes in, it's funny, like that essay that I just mentioned. There's this one anecdote where I share about a conflict between me and my brother. There were knives involved. It was epic. He ran really fast. Nobody was bloodied. Everyone survived. But the reason behind that was what I couldn't name at the time, which was a favoritism that was rooted in his masculine identity, his particular skin color. Like there were a number of things as far as race and gender that were poisoning me and benefiting him, but I did not have the names for that. And so my answer to that ongoing violence, right, of exclusion was to enact a kind of violence towards him. But the essay is like, yo, I don't have knives anymore. I have theories. Like I talk about things. So I've worked some things out.
I like that.
Yeah.
I have similar thing I won't talk about because I don't want to be implicated in anything, but I used to like deal, I was insecure at Berkeley, and I had all these big famous professors, and they intimidated my working class mission district kid that was a transfer student. And I was like, well, man, if this dude embarrasses me, I'm gonna blank.
Yeah.
That's how I compensated, for being unsure. So, which is, anyway.
Well, and I see that there's a question from Allison. Do you write in Spanish as well as English? Do you translate your work? And can you speak to how being a first-gen bilingual person impacts your writing approach and journey?
Great question. I write in Spanish, not as good as I write in English. And I try to, like, I was at a coffee shop yesterday, and I told these two women next to me here in Vegas, like, and they were code switching between Spanish and English like Tejanos do. People from Texas or other groups, like, Puerto Ricans do it. Other, a lot of our communities do it. They were just code switching between English and Spanish, and it just was music to my ears because that's how I grew up. So how do I reproduce that on the page?
Yeah.
And not, so yeah, I write in Spanish. I really want to dedicate, maybe I want to write a book in Spanish. I've written poetry in Spanish. Like I wrote my favorite word, one of my favorite words you can read in the book is conspiracy, conspirar, to conspire.
Yeah.
Right? If you look at the etymology of the word,
To breathe together. Yeah.
you're together, con, breathing.
Yeah.
Spirare.
It's one of my favorites too.
Yeah. And so the origin of it is the Christians are in the catacombs of Rome hiding from the empire. And some of those Christians and their allies are like together, con, breathing. By the way, the word spirare is where we get the word spirit, inspiration, aspire, etc. Because the Christians believed, the early Christians believed that the spirit resided in the breath. So people doing cocaine were being spiritual. Who knew? So anyway, so like, you're in the catacombs of Rome together, conspirar, to assassinate the emperor with your allies. So the way it brings the personal and the political.
June Jordan, there we go.
The intimate, June Jordan was my teacher at Berkeley.
I know.
And she taught us a lot about, speaking of popular education, Frere and technique, of the connection between what I call the epic and the intimate.
Yes.
They're not separate. And that's kind of like the subject of one of my next books after the one I'm working on now, which is about what I call the poet warrior tradition in the Americas,
Yeah.
where you have like Roque Dalton,
Yeah.
Otto René Castillo in Guatemala, and Pablo Neruda I would include in there, who was
Yeah,
we
yeah.
just found out was poisoned
Was
by the
poisoned.
fascists in Chile.
And they knew it. Everybody has talked about that for
Mhm.
forever. That's just proved.
Yeah, and I would add in English here in north of the U.S. Mexico border, I would add Audre Lorde, Adrienne
Yeah,
Rich to the
absolutely.
list of people who were poet warriors in terms of not separating the political and the poetic, the sublime and the practical, quote unquote, and the aesthetic and all that. That the way they teach art and literature in these universities and in MFAs and the way we separate it in U.S. literature is bullshit. So,
And I think Paula's calling us back.
okay, well, just the last part of that question is how it impacts my writing approach is that I try to bring in Spanish, but I don't put it in italics.
Yeah, I
You know, and
absolutely. Yeah.
writing a book has taught me to affirm my registers, plural. I have
Mhm.
many registers. You know, I can speak Calo, which is like
Yeah.
Cholo language. I speak Salvadoreño Spanish. I speak different variants of English. You know,
Mhm.
I'm an English professor now, so sometimes I have to sound fucking professorial, whatever that means. I wear sport coats, you know, all that.
Wow. We've only scratched the surface, I feel, between the two of you, but we're coming to a close, and I wanted to step in with a couple of questions.
For sure.
One for Roberto and one for you, Raina. Roberto, you invoked Du Bois. And it's funny because I was thinking about the fact that in your book, in your memoir, you talk about the period of your life where you went to El Salvador to fight, to join the movement against the US-backed fascists, basically, that were committing crimes against humanity there.
Right.
But after you did that, you came back to the US, obviously. And I'm wondering, wow, talk about double consciousness, which is where I get Du Bois. You must have really experienced it having gone back for that specific thing. Then you're coming back to the country that in a sense you were activism, actively coming against in a way. What was that like for you? I can't imagine mentally having to kind of be there doing that, come back and,
Let me describe what it was like first, what it was like to go from, I was volunteering with the UFW, the farm workers, before I went to the El Salvador.
Yeah.
Which was a revolutionary situation in the 80s. So if let's say, hypothetically speaking, that I smoked pot back in the day. Actually, I mentioned that I dealt pot and got busted by the cops, I think, in the book. So, but let's hypothetically say I smoked pot. And then, so being with the UFW and all that was kind of like smoking pot. It was a cool high politically. And then I go to El Salvador and it's the middle of a revolutionary situation, armed struggle. That would be hypothetically, let's say, theoretically, that I tried coke, that I did blow back in the day. Not saying that I did, but let's say that I did. I would compare the politically ideological shift from kind of a UFW, si se puede type democratically party aligned politic to a Marxist-Leninist armed struggle, revolutionary struggle, as being like smoking pot theoretically to doing blow theoretically. Whoa, right? So then I come back, my mind is turned out to revolutionary politics, and I'm forever changed from that moment to this day. I think I would be a more successful writer if I was more liberal and pro-capitalist. But we were talking before we were on the air, like, I think Terry Gross would invite me if I would have written something that didn't have a revolution anti-capitalism in it, right? Because if you look at most of the prize winning in the United States, they're quiet about the matter of capitalism, even though capitalism is the issue of our time, of destroying the planet through climate change. So, it was a night and day, and I feel like my mission changed. I now feel like my job is to be a bridge kind of to the beauty of both sides, to foster conversation across borders, but also to translate that rich and deep Latin American experience of literature and revolution and poetry and politics that we urgently need. We need a generation of poet warriors to challenge the system that's taken us all down. So,
Yeah, I mean, it definitely seems like it kind of ignited the activism, the activists in you for both places.
and the artist and the writer, they're
Yeah.
never separate within the Americas, in the Americas that I know.
Right.
Like the poet in me was not separate from the revolutionary, right? I learned that, like, wow, they really are not separate. We've got this Hegelian discipline of systems that create these boxes of, you're over here, you're an activist, and you're over here, you're a writer. So I'm sure Raina has a lot to say about that too.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Like the divisions are false. The structures even of genre, like, oh, I'm a prose writer, I'm a poet. No. I think that, there are so many like folks who engage in the work of land culturing, gardening, farm workers who are academics, who are scholars, right? Who are deep scholars. So like the divisions of knowledge are also quite false. It's how we privilege a particular knowledge set and the credentials that go with it that are also these divisions of elite status and so on, which if we undermine that, we would be far better in how we recognize our interconnected community striving, like that our striving, our thriving comes from that recognition of interconnectedness. And that is also related to the climate, right? How we are within the world as like natural beings within a natural world. But yeah,
Goes back to what I said when I first came back on. We've only scratched the surface.
Absolutely.
Now you both have raised a whole other issue of climate change and Black and brown people, how they are the communities most impacted.
Right.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I like how you mentioned kind of the intersection of writing and artistry and activism. Raina knows I actually have an Instagram interview series where I talk to authors, artists, and activists. And more often, I have someone on and they cross all three or they cross two. And, it's becoming more rare that it's just, I'm just a writer, So you're absolutely right, Roberta. Those things, tend to cross each other and come up, throughout life. Raina, I have a quick question for you before I have to wrap it up. Your book is written, the title is in lowercase.
Yes.
And I would have to make myself write it that way because obviously grammar teaches us otherwise. Yes. I'm wondering, obviously that's deliberate. And if you wouldn't mind, does it have something? I know Bell Hooks was the same way with her name. Yeah. So could you speak to that? And then I'm going to have to wrap things up and sell some books here.
Oh, absolutely. So the whole book is in lowercase, and part of that actually began yes, bell hooks in the invocation in connection with Black feminism and particularly her work, but also in the use of the I, the capitalized I, which I perceive as like focusing so much on the personality rather than also thinking about the many ancestors, peoples, cultures, communities that are informing any I. And so I emphasize that lowercase I as a collective I, a recognition of, yes, I could say a we, but it's also rooted in like a particular subjectivity. All of these people are walking within me. They are a part of who I am. And And I also have to acknowledge all of these people, all of these cultures. So by diminishing the personality culture, it is also this appeal to thinking about connection. So the Black mothers connection, health outcomes for Black mothers, it's not just my struggle. It is not just my ill. It is actually a community illness. And we have to look at it that way. And if we, as a community, focus on center a bell hooks practice, center the most vulnerable, the margin to center work that she speaks of, then all of our work becomes easier, becomes more supportive of one another. When you center the most vulnerable, then you change how your streets go. When you center the most vulnerable, then you think about the incredible ASL interpreter at the recent game, right? Just working it. When you center the most vulnerable, you think about representation.
What book does she do that in? Raina, I want to recommend to my students.
I believe it actually is like margin to center.
Okay.
But yeah, I think it's a really great one to look at to center. I'm going to make sure. And yeah, feminist theory from margin to center.
Yeah. And I'm sorry that I said, preface the question, Raina, of quick question, simple answer, because there was nothing simple about it. That was a deep.
I thought about it.
I know. So, bad on me thinking, oh, this is a simple approach. You could do a whole talk just on what you were talking to us about, the lowercase and the community and the centering. That's a whole other conversation. But I'm glad I asked, because I knew there was something and I had to write it so many times, for the website, for social media, for this introduction. And I wanted to capitalize it. And I was like, I'm not going to do it because I know there's a reason.
I appreciate that. Yes.
Well, both of you are amazing. Thank you so much for doing this. I know I didn't even give you enough notice, but you were both on board for it. Made it easier that you know each other and love each other and respect each other. And it came out in this conversation. Yeah, thanks, guys. And I know it's late for you, Raina, so I'm going to wrap this up and tell our audience, thanks for participating, whether you're came here for the live event or coming in later. We love the questions that were in the chat, and we love our authors buy their books. We have plenty of both at the San Francisco store and the Corte Madera store. Feel free to call, come by, or go online. In fact, you can just click the button beneath this, the screen, and you can order the book, both their books. So once again, thanks for joining us. I am going to do
Paula.
Yeah, I'm going to do it
Thank
again
you so
tomorrow
much.
night. We have two great authors, a debut author, and someone I'm sure you both know, Mei Li Chai, discussing their novels and things going on with race and racism in the Asian community. Thank you both. Thank you to the audience. Everybody have a fabulous night, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye, Raina. Good to see you.
Bye. It's so good seeing you. Bye.